Welcome back to another episode of the Secret Society of Strangers podcast. I'm Lee here with Josh and Jen. How you doing,
What it
guys?
do?
This is going to be another guest episode, guys. We had the chance to interview actually really cool guests, really interesting, fun topic. We've been a little somber lately in our topic choices, so it was nice to just kind of just throw around some theories. We had a chance to interview Darren, who is the host of the DB Cooper Vortex. It's just Cooper Vortex if you look it up, but it's the DB Cooper story. He's been researching it for 6+ years on the podcast and longer in his personal life, which, I mean, if you spend that much time on anything.
Yeah. He's an expert.
Yeah, you got your 10,000 hours. But we had a lot of fun talking to him. If you don't know what DB Cooper, the story of DB Cooper is, it's one of the most interesting or fascinating heist stories ever. It's one of the only ones where we don't know what happened to the guy. He was never found. So Darren, we talk about who he could possibly be, what it was like when he was hijacking the plane that he hijacked, and all that stuff. So it was really fun.
Yeah, it was super interesting because I didn't really know much about. I mean, I knew a little bit about the Cooper story and everything like that, but for him to break it all down Barney style was just
There's so much more information than I ever knew.
Oh yeah, there was a few big things that he mentioned that I was like, oh wow, I really. And one I'll say right now, you'll hear it in the interview, but he mentions that none of the people on the plane while he was hijacking the plane knew that the plane was being hijacked.
Yeah.
Which is freaking crazy to think that you're in the cylinder in the air and someone
no idea
got a bomb and you don't know. Allegedly. So it was a really cool conversation, and we actually will probably try to have him back on again and do a little bit more of a theories episode. Now that everyone is be up on the story, we could just dive right into who he is, maybe where he is, maybe, and all that stuff. That would be fun.
Get into some more suspects and play some Guess Who.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'd love that.
Does your character have glasses?
Guess again.
Does
your character heist $200,000 and jump out of an airplane?
Does he look like he's smirking, like he knows something you don't know? Well. All right, guys. So this is the interview coming right up. I hope you guys enjoy it. And again, as always, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for subscribing. And if you want to be a guest, you can email us at
ssospodcast@gmail.com.
Bing, bing, bing. All right, guys. Enjoy this interview.
Society. Strangers. Strangers in society.
Strangers on the internet.
The secret.
Strangers in society and welcome, stranger.
Secret society.
Strangers. Society. Welcome to the secret society. Strangers.
We have Darren here. Hey, Darren, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. It's our pleasure. Thank you for being flexible. We had some unforeseen problems, so we appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries. I get it.
We're going to dive right into this. You are, I guess you consider yourself an expert on DB Cooper?
At this point, I guess.
You've been doing it for quite a while. How long have you been researching?
I've been doing the show for 6 or 7 years, and I've been real deep in DB Cooper for 10 years.
That whole mystery is one of my first dives into real unsolved mysteries that actually exist.
Yeah, I was going to say my first memory of it is Robert Stack and seeing an episode on Unsolved Mysteries, my favorite show of all time then, and I mean somewhat now. But yeah, it definitely captures your attention.
Absolutely. Robert Stack was my intro to the case as well.
Oh yeah.
That came out in 1988.
That stuff.
Yeah, I watched it with my little sister, and we were living just outside Portland at the time, and that came on. The Portland airport was that's right by us. And it's near Woodland, Washington. It's oh my God, that's right by us.
Since you are the expert, Darren, I'm gonna let you just kind of lay out the origin story of DB Cooper for anyone who is not familiar, and then I think we're just gonna pummel you with questions.
Yeah, absolutely. The most important thing to know is that DB Cooper only exists for a few hours. So, November 24th, 1971, a man walks into the Portland International Airport. He buys a one-way ticket to Seattle that departs at 2:50. He pays in cash. The fare is $20. And the only identification you needed at that point in time was the gate agent asked his name. And he gave his name as Cooper, Dan Cooper. He's one of the last to board the plane. He sits in the back of the plane. Right as the plane is taking off, he passes a stewardess a note. Hilariously, she just assumed it was an older businessman hitting on her, so she didn't read the note. She just slipped it in her purse. He grabs her attention and is like, "Miss, you better have a look at that note. I have a bomb." He's now hijacking the plane. He wants $200,000 and 2 sets of parachutes, 2 fronts and 2 backs, or 2 mains and 2 reserves. By the time that they land in Seattle, the airline agrees to his demands. They round up some parachutes and $200,000. The plane lands in Seattle around 5:45. He gets his money and his parachutes on board, and he lets the passengers off the plane. None of the passengers knew the plane was being hijacked. They found out they were involved in a hijacking when they got off the plane on a weird runway, and the FBI was there waiting for them.
Huh.
Some people claim they had suspicion after the fact, but yeah, you know how that goes.
Yeah.
So once we're on the ground in Seattle now, DB Cooper wants to be flown to Mexico City, but more important than where to fly, he tells the pilots how to fly the plane. He wants the plane to fly no higher than 10,000 feet. The cabin will remain depressurized. He wants the landing gear down, the flaps set to 15 degrees, and he wants to take off with the aft staircase down. And at this point, the pilots aren't even sure if they can fly with the aft staircase down, nevertheless take off. So they call air traffic control. Air traffic control's like flipping through manuals. They have no idea. So they have to call Boeing and ask Boeing, "Hey, can this plane fly with the aft staircase down?" They said, "Yes, we have tested that. It can fly in that configuration." The pilots refused to take off with the aft staircase down. They said it was unsafe in a plane full of fuel. Cooper interestingly tells them that he disagrees with their assessment, but he's willing to lower the aft staircase after takeoff. So once those demands are met, they can't fly all the way to Mexico City in that configuration, so they're going to have to stop to refuel. There's some discussion. They agree to a refueling stop in Reno. The plane takes off from Seattle for Reno about 7:45, and the plane lands in Reno about 10:45, and Cooper is not on board. Somewhere between Seattle and Reno, he jumps out of the plane, never to be seen or heard from again.
And that's why you told the story and not me.
Yes.
There's a few things in there that I did not know. I did not know that the whole plane did not know that he was hijacking the plane.
No one on board knew they were being hijacked. He communicated that note to a stewardess. The first stewardess panics, understandably, and sort of loses it, and then she runs into the cockpit. Another stewardess notices that her coworker is losing it, and she was like, "It's okay, you go into the cockpit, I'll handle it." And then that stewardess, her name's Tina Mucklow, ended up sitting next to Cooper for the whole duration of the flight. And one of my favorite things about this whole story is Cooper's in the back of the airplane drinking a bourbon and 7-Up, smoking cigarettes with his sunglasses on. But even better than that is this beautiful young stewardess is lighting his cigarettes for him.
Wow.
It's such
Just
like a
living his best life.
70s
It
like
is.
touch. Yeah.
Yes.
But
Luxury air travel.
yeah.
Oh man.
Oh, yeah. Even as a hijacker.
Yeah.
Now, I guess the first question that comes across most people's minds, especially with your description, is like his knowledge of
Yes.
Everything, the whole situation. He understood the air traffic control. He understood how the stewardess would react, and then he understood how to fly the plane. So, do we think that that has anything to do with his actual identity?
Well, it has to, right? Because he knew more than the pilots about that plane. He knew that that plane could be jumped. If I've talked to many people that were involved in the skydiving community at that time, and they all say the same thing when they heard that he did that. Their first thought was, "Oh my God, you can jump from that jet." It wasn't like, "What a crazy crime," whatever. Their thought as skydivers was, "Oh my God, you could jump from that. That's incredible." And the fact that he knew not only that that plane can actually take off with the aft stairs down. There's a YouTube video. I can't remember the country, but it's a terrible video of like people escaping a war-torn country, and it's a 727 with the aft stairs down, and the plane takes off, and people are running and clinging to those back stairs. So yeah, not only can it fly with the aft stairs down, but it can take off with that.
Wow.
But interestingly, he had to be shown how to lower the aft stairs. So it's a very interesting knowledge set. So he knew the exact perfect jump configuration for that plane, which Air America, the CIA, the U.S. Air Force were doing covert operations over Vietnam using 727s because they looked like a commercial airliner, because it
That
was.
makes sense.
But then they could drop shit out the back of it.
Yeah.
They could drop people or they could drop goods out the back. So you have this guy that knows the ideal perfect jump configuration, but not how to lower the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
Yeah.
I don't know. It really leaves, because I'm thinking as you're talking, like maybe he is just familiar with like manuals of planes and he studies planes, but then you think maybe he's just like you said, like a skydiver, and he's never actually operated it. He's just been around it and knows enough to be like, do this, this, and this. But then, like when it comes to it, he's like, how do I get out?
Yeah, what do I do with my hands?
Yeah. Well, that was my first thought because, the theory that he was a Boeing employee, to have that level of knowledge and to know that they could fly, with that door open. But then listening to your podcast and hearing one of the guests, and you kind of go through that, I switched and I was like, well, maybe he was military. But then I still was like, why wouldn't he know how to open the door? That throws
Yeah, and
me
it
a
could
little
be
bit.
he was on some military version of that craft that was configured differently. So now he's on the civilian commercial airliner and the controls are all different. Or I've even thought about it like the way a really high level race car driver might not even know how many cylinders the engine has. And the mechanic for that car knows everything about that car, but would be a terrible race car driver. So it's like they're both the top of their field on the same thing, but with a completely different knowledge of the same machine.
Yeah, I could see that.
And you bring that up, so that brings up almost a team. Do we think he had other people on that plane with him that got off as a passenger that were involved? I'm sure they debriefed every person thoroughly, but
Oh yeah,
Everybody
and
was just sitting in a room.
I've heard
getting
from
grilled.
Bruce Smith did this report talking to an ex-husband of one of the stewardesses, and he said that they believed that the FBI was following them for days and even a couple of weeks after the hijacking. And she wasn't involved, of course, but you do have to like double check that.
yeah, especially the employees.
Yeah, do your due diligence and stuff and look into all these people and be like, oh shit, did somebody help this guy or
But I'm going to take this moment to dispel two theories that I absolutely hate and cannot stand.
Do it, yes.
And those two theories are, number one, that DB Cooper never jumped from the plane. He just sort of hid on the plane. It landed in Reno, and he escaped or walked out or had a badge and whatever. It's so ridiculous. Yeah. So they're ready and waiting because they thought there was a chance that he would just roll out of the back of the aircraft when they landed. So there were cars ready. So as soon as the plane touched down, there are cars behind it. They immediately searched the plane with dogs. So there was no like, oh, he hid in the secret compartment. Not to mention the fact that there are no secret hidden compartments in planes. They're using every goddamn inch of space available.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other theory that I just can't stand is that either the flight crew was in on it with Cooper and or DB Cooper didn't exist and the flight crew just made this all up. And it's ridiculous for many examples. First of all, flight crews don't know who they're going to work with maybe until that morning or even the day before or something like that. So it would be ridiculous, next to impossible to plan something like that. Also, I've talked to many, many people that worked in the airlines in that time period, and they all say the same thing. It was a fantastic job. They loved it. It was glamorous. It paid well. It was adventurous. And lastly, it just doesn't make any sense at all. There's no evidence pointing to any of them. There were people that didn't work for airlines that saw DB Cooper. So it's just, those are the two theories I'm just not even willing to hear. I've listened to some goofy ass shit, but those, I'm just not even willing to entertain it. It's not in the realm of possibility.
Yeah,
but they always come up. They always come up. Oh, I just watched this DB Cooper doc, and I have this new theory that I bet no one's ever thought of. What if the flight crew just made him up? It's like, oh my god!
Bored on a Tuesday, so we're just gonna make up this whole person and everything.
No.
Was there something with the parachutes though that he was given? I can't remember the specifics. That they were, one was a dummy or something that I've heard.
There was one that was a dummy, and the parachutes. That information has changed a lot over the years, and I think we're finally to a point where we pretty much have that all figured out. So he gets 2 Navy backpack reserve chutes that would have been for Navy pilots, would have worn these chutes just to have something. It also would have been like crew members and things like that of the plane would have worn these backpacks. And those were the backpacks, and he's given 2 front packs or reserve chutes. And the backpacks he was given did not have the provision to hook up a front chute because the back chutes are emergency bailouts. So you're lucky that you have that thing on your back. You're not getting an extra one on front.
Right.
So he's given these 2 front reserves, and one of them was a training chute, just meant for like classroom display. And it had like an X sewn on it, and the chute inside wasn't deployable.
Oh, wow.
And he either took that with him or he just looked at it and threw it out of the back of the plane. Either one is plausible, but it wasn't there when the plane landed. The only thing that was left behind when the plane lands is he had a black clip-on tie. And that black clip-on tie was left on his seat, most likely by accident, because he asked for his notes back. The note that he passed the stewardess, he asked for that back. And then, like I mentioned, the stewardess was lighting his cigarettes for him. She was lighting his cigarettes with his matchbook. And at one point, she used the last match, and he asked for that matchbook back.
Can't get
Every
no fingerprints,
detail.
no DNA, no nothing.
No.
They dusted the plane for fingerprints, and they got a bunch of partials. Also, you know, in a plane, everyone's hands are on every same surface. You're leaning against the same thing, touching the same thing. But they thought either he maybe covered his fingerprints with super glue or something like that, or he wiped down the surfaces. But they believed all they really had was a good palm print next to his seat where he might have put his hand down to stand up. But the military wasn't taking palm prints at that point in time. So unless you had a guy that was willing to give a palm print that was the same as on that plane, a palm print doesn't help you track anyone down.
And we found what they found in the 80s. They found cash, right? That was his.
They did.
That's real?
That is the only other piece of evidence. So after the skyjacking, the only piece of evidence found is, like I mentioned, Cooper asked for $200,000. Now, interestingly, Seafirst Bank in Seattle had $250,000 set aside where all of the serial numbers were recorded on microfilm, just in case there was some hijacking or kidnapping or ransom scenario. So they pull the 200,000 out of this 250,000. That's the money they give to Cooper. It's good money. There's nothing wrong with it, but they have the serial numbers logged. And there's a lot in common with the money that if you were a teller or a banker, you would know what to look for. So it was all L series serial numbers, which means it all came from the San Francisco Reserve. It was a lot of star notes and a lot of 1963 and 1969 Series A. And so fast forward, none of that money comes up. We never find anything. And then in 1980, on the shore of the Columbia River in Vancouver, Washington, this 8-year-old boy, Brian Ingram, he brushes some sand aside so they can make a fire on the beach and comes across what he assumed was garbage, gives it to his dad. His dad looks at it, and it's really badly deteriorated money, but a lot of it.
I'd be
And
so mad.
they take it home to figure out if they could save it to cash it back in, just like everyone else would.
Yeah.
And one of their friends is like, hey, what if that's DB Cooper's money? I bet it's DB Cooper's money. And there's a reward for that. So they turn that into the FBI. The FBI confirms, yes, this is DB Cooper's money. They dig up the whole beach area where that money was found, and they don't find anything else. The other thing about this money, it's found on a place called Tina Bar. And Tina Bar is 20, 25 miles as the crow flies west of where we believed Cooper would have jumped out of the plane. And if he jumps out of that plane, the wind is going to take him east. So where the money is found is so baffling that the people who have researched the DB Cooper case the most don't want to talk about it because it doesn't make any sense. It almost doesn't relate to the case. I've spoken to people that said if DB Cooper was in this room with us right now, I don't believe he could tell us how that money got to Tina Bar.
Really?
Wow.
So the whole possibility of him landing where he landed and then just backtracking is not a thing?
No, it's not. There's even been theories like, what if it landed near this waterway and this waterway took it over to this waterway and then it washed it up on this shore? Or what if it was this, he landed in the river and then there was this dredging operation and then the dredge dumped the sand spoils on this location, but then washed it down to here. You have to get into ridiculous theories to make the money show up there. I just had a hydrologist on my show to talk about this specific thing. And he was talking about how specifically things on the Columbia waterway would move and tides and you have ships and he's like, you'd have these debris fields and he's like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. To me, it seems like it was planted by human hands. But then that also adds more questions because there have been some forensic work done on this case by this guy named Tom Kay, a civilian, which I don't know how many other cases all the forensic work is done by civilians, but this case it is.
Yeah.
And he looked at diatoms on the bills. Now, I'm not a scientist, but diatoms are these little organisms in the water. They're seasonal and very identifiable. And so he looked at the diatoms on these bills. And the diatoms on the money come from the spring and the summer. And that is a huge problem in the DB Cooper case because he jumps in the fall. So we should have, if the money got wet that night, we should have fall and winter diatoms on the bills also. But we only see spring and summer. So somehow the money didn't get wet until spring or summer, which doesn't make any sense at all.
Not at all. And just to clear this part up for anyone wondering, like we do assume he landed and was alive for a short period of time at least afterwards. Like he didn't perish of
Well,
the fall?
we can assume that, Lee, but we have no idea. That's another thing about this.
Nothing's been found. Not
There's nothing. I've said there is equal evidence he survived the jump and he died in the jump because there is no evidence either way.
it's see
How much money was found? Were they able to estimate how much they found?
It was $6,000. I think the bank says that it was $5,800 because some of the money was so badly deteriorated, but it should have been $6,000 because it was found the way it was assembled, basically. So you had 3 packets bundled together with a rubber band. And he said when he found it, the rubber band was intact, but as soon as they touched it, the rubber band fell apart.
Is there any way he let go of it at a separate point and it could have drifted? I'm sure someone's thought of this too. I'm asking.
Yeah, but it would have drifted the opposite way of the flight path. So where it is, it truly makes no sense at all. I had this guy, Marty Andrade, on the show a couple times, and he's just a brilliant dude. And he was saying, Darren, if I gave you $5 billion and we walked along the beach and you found a piece of trash on the beach and you could use that $5 billion to figure out how that piece of trash got there, you'll never, ever do it. Because the money found on Tina Bar is just like finding a piece of trash on the beach. There's a million ways it could have got there, and you will never figure it out.
It's just
How
so
did they
crazy
know?
that's literal same money from DB Cooper.
How did they determine when they thought that he jumped?
That's a good question. So the plane takes off from Seattle, like I said, about 7:50, and then in between 8:11 and 8:14, the pilots noticed these oscillations in some of their gauge readings, and then this pressure bump. And so they took notes of this, that in between 8:11 and 8:14, we had these oscillations and a pressure bump. They then theorized that was because he was walking down those stairs. It was causing the plane to change its aerodynamic profile. And then when he jumps off, those rear stairs rebound, and it causes a pressure bump in the cabin that you could feel in your ears, essentially. But they couldn't prove that. So what they decided to do was they took the exact same plane, and I'm not talking about the same make and model. They took the same plane that Cooper hijacked. They flew it out over the Pacific Ocean. They had a guy attached to a harness walk to the end of the stairs and kind of jump on him. And then they brought him back on the plane, and then they took a 200-pound sled, and then they pushed it off the back of the stairs to see with one of the same flight crew in there, asking them, was that the exact same thing you experienced? And they said, yes, it was. So now they have this flight path, and the flight path should be super accurate. I know it is debated in the DB Cooper world, but really it should be accurate because our most advanced radar for the United States and likely the world was on the West Coast at that time to defend us from Russia. So we had this SAGE radar system to detect incoming planes off the West Coast. And they used that during the hijacking. Hey, track this flight 305 because this could be important. Because this is a terrorist act over the United States, basically.
Right.
So the flight path, in my opinion, is rock solid.
Gotcha.
He slips under every defense made to be able to track something down or someone.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, is this a super master criminal plan? Because it seems like it, or was it scribbled on a napkin? Because the date he chose, the day before Thanksgiving, it's sort of in the evening. So if you're a higher up at work, you're probably getting off early on Wednesday. You're off Thursday. You're off Friday for the long weekend. In Portland, Oregon, the sun sets. I looked it up. I think on that day, the sunset was at 4:30. So if you're boarding a flight at 2:50, you're well aware that it's going to be dark in an hour and a half.
Time almost.
So he knew he was going to be jumping at night. He knew it's overcast and cloudy weather. He picked insane circumstances to do this under. And is that a choice? Did he choose to make it this difficult thing where no one could follow him and no one could see him?
That's what
Is
I
there
wondered, the
yeah.
theories on where they thought that he should have landed after he
Mhm.
jumped. If there was any thoughts on the significance of that or
Well, there was significance in the beginning because now you have this ground search. And so, really, he actually had about 40 hours before they even knew where to look for him. So, of course, it's on the news and everything in the whole area, but they didn't know. They didn't know until they looked on the plane in Reno that he jumped because nobody thought he was going to jump, first of all.
Really?
Then realizing that he jumped, they had no idea initially where between Seattle and Reno that would have been. And they didn't put together this test of the plane and this oscillation and pressure bump theory, which determined a landing zone until 40 hours later. There's a ground search, but the weather is getting bad in that area. And in those woods and bad weather, it's really impossible to search for anything. So it's called off for a while. There's a manhunt. They don't continue a ground search again until spring. And at that point, they send hundreds of people. They use the National Guard. They can't use the National Guard to look for a criminal or a fugitive because there's some law about using the military to hunt criminals where you can't do that. So they had the National Guard organize a camping training exercise
Always a
where,
training exercise.
where they just
Yep.
marched through the woods. Because at that point, really, they thought they were looking for a body,
right.
Yeah.
and they did find one. They found the body of a teenage girl that had been murdered, maybe 10 or 15 years earlier, near the
Wow.
grist mill in Woodland. But they didn't find DB Cooper. They didn't find a parachute. They didn't find his briefcase bomb. They didn't find anything.
No one reported anyone missing from anywhere in the area.
No, and even like I'm
Yeah.
talking about this big ground search, but if we all live in Springfield, right, and we see on the news a man fell out of the sky with $200,000 and no one knows where he is, are the four of us going to go march around and look for $200,000? Yes, of course we are. And that's what everyone in the area did. As soon it was reported, like, oh, he jumped over Woodland and Ariel and Amboy somewhere in this vicinity,
Oh, yeah.
people went looking. You
Yeah.
didn't have to have a ground search because everyone was already looking. And it's an area where it's logged and there's hunting and fishing going on. So it's very well traveled.
And then in the years following the money and all that, people have come forward that have claimed to be relatives, that have claimed to know him in his, let's say, second life. Do you want to talk a little bit about any of those that stand out to you?
Well,
I
I think more interesting than relatives coming forward, I think one of the most interesting things about this case is the number of confessions. So
I never even thought
it's
about
not
that.
just that, oh, yeah, by the way, I think it could have been my grandpa. No, we have direct confessions. And depending on the account or the FBI files, anywhere between dozens and hundreds of people have
Just
confessed to
confess.
this crime.
It's-
I had Larry Carr on my show, who was a case agent in the, let's say, from like 2005 to 2015 kind of era. And it was a hobby case at that point in time because it's been an unsolved crime for so long. And he put so much effort into it and got it into the public light. But in that tenure, he told me when I had him on my show that he had two different people go into an FBI office to confess to the crime. And
the hell?
I totally understand, like, it's me and Josh at the bar, and I'm like, hey, Josh, by the way, you know that DB Cooper thing? It was me. I get that confession, but what I don't get is when Josh goes into an FBI office
Right.
to confess to a crime he truly knows he had nothing to do with.
Mhm. I was going to ask, what's the benefit? Like, what's the hope?
Yeah.
That
Yeah, what do
they're
I
going
get
to
out
give
of
you
that?
money? Like, what do you think's going to happen?
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
congratulations, you
And
pulled off the
I've
greatest
spoken
heist of all time.
I've spoken to, God, at least a dozen people who heard their father, grandpa, or uncle confess directly to them, to being the hijacker.
Yeah, I could see that.
I would have been asking so many specifics, but like, all right, if you're him,
Right.
lay it out for me, X, Y, and Z. Let's see
Mhm.
if this adds up.
And then where's all my Christmas gifts? How come I get
no shit.
crappy T-shirts?
Yeah. Oh wait, because you lost $6,000 of it in the fucking woods somewhere. Uh-huh, I got you now.
I've even personally heard 2 taped confessions.
Oh my
God.
God.
One of the taped confessions you can listen to, there's a short docu-series called The Real D.B. Cooper, I believe it's called, or The Real D.B. Cooper Story. But it's about Walter Recca. And Walter Recca's confession tapes are played into that. He confessed to his friend, who his friend, Carl Lauren, agreed to keep it a secret until after Walter passed. And then there were a couple books about Walt in that documentary.
And how many of these people actually fit like the age bracket, the description? Sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do we have any
Half.
suspects?
Yeah, I was
Well,
wondering
a
if
lot of
anybody
them,
stands
weirdly.
out. Oh,
It's
Really?
and then there's 2 primary sketches of DB Cooper, which I've discussed on my show. Like, does that help the case? Does it hurt it to have these different sketches?
Mm.
But they're so generic, especially for the time period, that I joked on my show once that if you just pull up a picture of your grandpa and put it next to a DB Cooper sketch, he's a dead match for it. And I had this person email me and they're like, hey, I just want to let you know that I'm positive my grandpa wasn't DB Cooper, but here's a picture of him next to the sketch, and he's a dead match.
Yeah, I have relatives that I could
I
definitely
am
do that with too.
positive that it's not
I was going to
Right.
say that because if he did land and he lands anywhere near a town, nothing about him stood out that like you'd be like, that guy's a criminal or he doesn't belong here. He's just the most average looking person.
yeah.
That could have
Absolutely. And I think he took steps to be that way. When they asked
Oh, yeah.
around people at the airport that were boarding that flight, do you remember him standing around? And one gentleman recalled a bunch of us were standing by the window right before boarding because we were all joking how we didn't want to have to run through the rain to get to the plane because it didn't have a jetway. You walked out of the airport
the tarmac,
into the
yeah.
outside, outdoors, and then walked up the aft staircase of that plane. And he said when they were all joking about that, he was standing like 20 feet away from everyone else, just looking out the window facing away from everyone. So he already knew at that point, like, I'm just going to be completely unnoticeable.
Right.
Just gonna fade into the background.
Yeah, and the date you said you pointed out, like it is the perfect time, like time of day, the date, like right before a holiday where like no one's paying attention to anybody that's not in their immediate circle. Like
Right. And if Jen is gone for a long weekend at Thanksgiving, are you going to think anything nefarious about that?
Nope.
No. She probably went and had Thanksgiving with her family in Omaha. You know, she didn't hijack a plane.
Yep, that's.
And so I'm sure they tried the nationwide missing persons, you know, once all of that settled down to see if anybody fitting his description had been, you know, reported missing from somewhere.
They did look at that, but weirdly at this point in time, that didn't really work for men. So if your dad went missing in 1970, he went to get a pack of smokes and never came back. He was not reported as a missing person.
I know. It's so true.
And there were magazine articles about how you could ditch your family and disappear.
Yep.
And the idea that a man would
so bad.
Yeah. Go to a new town, start a new family. Men didn't really get reported as missing unless unless it was unusual circumstances.
Yeah.
And even sometimes they wouldn't be reported missing for years later. So because I've been involved in this case, I've talked to people about, you know, the North American missing persons database and that kind of stuff and searching those leads. But it's so weird for men in that period of time because there could be cases where the man wasn't reported missing until the mid 80s. And it's some girl who was 11 and said, you know, in 1974, my dad said he was going to go get groceries and never came back.
And everyone in her life just lied to her and was like, "Oh, he'll be back."
Yeah,
right.
no, store's just really far away.
Wow.
Yeah, so weirdly, like missing persons, men wasn't a part of that unless it was already a suspicious circumstance.
Damn.
That's crazy. Well, speaking of gender, one of your or two of your guests technically said or have a theory or said they met him and he had a sex change and is transgender, which then I feel like it's harder to believe than now, but also then it would like kind of slide under the radar because no one's talking about it. So,
Well, yeah, because I mean,
what?
like back in that time, wouldn't there be like only like a few like teaching hospitals doing that kind of surgery and stuff like that? So you would have to cross-reference with those. It's not like it is now.
You guys, this is a Portland story.
It's keeping it weird.
It's very true. Got Darth Vader riding a unicycle playing bagpipes.
But yeah, Barb Dayton would have been born Robert Dayton. Robert Dayton was like this super badass merchant marine, became a prisoner of war in the Philippines, I believe, and then was released because there was a ship that needed more crew members, and they were like, "Hey, we have this guy in a pit that was a merchant marine. He could probably do it."
Pit guy.
And gets out that way, is one of Hell's Angels, then becomes the first person, as far as I'm aware, in Washington State to get gender reassignment surgery. Got it done in Baltimore. Got it done in 1969. So this would have been predating the hijacking. So Robert Dayton becomes Barbara Dayton. She is working as a librarian in the Seattle Public Library. She sort of becomes disillusioned, like this new life wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I miss the sense of adventure. I miss feeling like a badass. So I'm gonna do something nuts and something crazy to prove to myself what a badass I still am. And if I die, then I die. Whatever. And so she pulls off the DB Cooper skyjacking. According to her story, she lands in like Woodburn or Aurora, Oregon. Throws the money in a culvert because it was never about the money, and then casually goes back to her life as a female librarian at the Seattle Public Library.
Wow. I
The
just needed to
problem
feel
is
alive for like 48 hours. And then now I'm just gonna go back to
Exactly.
the decimal system.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, get fucked. That's not true.
See, the thing I think that would just be perfect for this story with all the other like just off clues that we have would be having the reassignment surgery just prior to the actual hijacking, assuming if anyone thought about it that it was like you and you had a sex change, they would probably look from the date of the jacking on, not before it, for IDs.
So not jacking off, but jacking on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but Barb told Ron and Pat Foreman that they never caught DB Cooper because they were always looking for a man.
And again, you can't say it's not.
And
So it's
there's
kinda interesting.
there's a new sort of twist with that.
Ooh, really?
Recently, there's a 1985 book called DB Cooper: What Really Happened. And it's this author, Max Gunther, who is a very serious journalist, releases this book about a story he's been told, and from an anonymous woman named Clara. And Clara gives all the details of the DB Cooper hijacking, what happened, how she knew him, and that he had died recently of a heart attack. And the author releases this book. He can't confirm all the details. He's not 100% sure if it's true, but he believes it to be true. That book was always kind of shit on in the DB Cooper community. There's a lot of things in there that are wrong. There's some wacky details. There's some things that he got right, but then again, like maybe it was chance, you know? If I would have said as a child, like the next basketball star is going to come out of Ohio, it wouldn't be like because it was LeBron James, it was a premonition for me. I had a 1 in 50 chance, right?
Yeah.
So it was just luck. So some of those things could be that. However, there's some people in the Vortex who compared some writings of Barb Dayton to the writings of this Clara in that book. And using these stylometry apps, which sort of analyzes word count, word choice, sentence structure, grammar, it seems like there's a really good chance that Barb Dayton is Clara. Now, that's interesting for so many reasons, because it doesn't necessarily make Barb D.B. Cooper.
Right.
But Barb did confess to people to being D.B. Cooper, so she was obviously very interested in this case.
Mm-hmm.
She was openly a fan of this author. So,
Okay.
is it possible that she sort of catfished this author with her own fantasy story? Because in the book, Clara falls in love with D.B. Cooper. And so is she moving from becoming this badass guy to now I'm a woman, I want to have a love and a relationship, which Barb ended up getting. She eventually got married. But is that like the conversation with that author, was that a fantasy that Barb was playing out that was believable enough for this person?
Fanfic.
Yeah.
And if that's true, that's so amazing. That's like the most Cooper Vortex thing ever.
Just win a Pulitzer or something.
Yeah. So what evidence could someone, with as little as we know, what evidence could someone come forward with to prove that they were D.B. Cooper?
We discuss that in the case all the time, because a confession's not going to do it anymore, because I've heard 17 of them. So, and that's just what I've heard. There have been many. But really at this point in time, you would have to have the most crazy, believable story to get traction that we could prove some details on. Outside of that, what you need is a plane ticket, a $20 bill, or produce the parachute that we know he jumped with.
God.
So there was a news story that came out in November that D.B. Cooper's parachute was found.
Mm-hmm.
And it got a lot of traction. I guess it's good for the case, but pisses me off because that parachute that he presented that in 2022. And of course, the D.B. Cooper group watches that. There's taking screenshots. It's on the forums seconds after it goes live, and everyone's immediately shitting on it. Like, that's not the right parachute container. It has D rings on it. Oh my God, look, he just flashed the serial number. That's not the same serial number. Why would you do that?
People are on it, man.
And so it just got completely torn apart, and he disappeared for a while. And then he hired a publicist around the anniversary of the skyjacking this year and got that article to run in a few places, which then the AP picked up on. And then these other small outlets are like, hey, did you hear about this news story? And it's just so wildly wrong. His suspect is ridiculous, but never mind that. I'm willing to entertain a ridiculous suspect, but to show the wrong parachute, it really...
Right.
Ryan Burns makes this great analogy. If I robbed a bank and I got away in a Ford Mustang, and everyone knows I got away in a red Ford Mustang, and then Jen is like, hey, I found Darren's getaway car, and then she shows us a yellow Camaro. It's like, that's not
Right.
it. That's not a red Ford Mustang. That's a yellow Camaro,
car,
you dope.
but it's not the right car.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Is there any information that you think or you know of that the FBI is holding on to help identify him? That, like, if he knows this, obviously he's him because no one else knows this.
Well, that information is actually out now. So it was, I can't remember the lawyer's name, but in 2016, this dude sued Mark Zaid. The lawyer's name is Mark Zaid. He sued the FBI working sort of on the Robert Rackstraw case because they're not doing anything with it really. So he was like, well, if you're not going to do anything with it, let's see the files. And there's 500,000 pages of files on this. And so they're like, okay, we'll release 10,000 at a time, 1 month at a time. So it's been going on now for a few years. They've been releasing files. Sometimes there's good stuff, sometimes not so much. But there was a file released on what to ask people confessing to the crime, because it wasn't like it was just a one-time thing. It was something they needed to put together because it was happening. And so I'm saying DB Cooper, but when I told you the story, he didn't give his name as DB Cooper. He gives his name as Dan Cooper. And then there's like a reporting mix-up that happens. It goes out of the air as DB Cooper. That sticks. So one of the questions they would ask to people is, what name did you give? And if they say, I gave the name DB Cooper because I'm DB Cooper, well then, okay, right away, that's no good. They ask how old was the gate agent you bought the ticket from? And what gender were they? Then it was like, when you boarded the plane, where did you sit? What was your drink order? I can't remember the other one, but they had 8 questions, and I know the answer to all of them now. But back then, maybe you could read everything you could find and might be able to answer 1 or 2, but you certainly wouldn't have been able to get them all without some knowledge inside the case. And no one ever got to the point where they were curious. I mean, reading these files, the people that confessed, they were almost disinterested by the time they even gave a confession. They chased so many suspects.
Yeah.
Right.
There's an FBI file from, I want to say it's like 1975 or 1976, where they're reaching out to a bunch of different agents across the country to have a meeting about the case in San Francisco. And it says something I'm paraphrasing, but it's something along the lines of, we need fresh ideas because it's been 5 years and we haven't gotten anywhere. We have no evidence. We have no leads that have gotten anywhere. We need fresh ideas. So everyone come to San Francisco with fresh ideas on this Cooper case.
It's just such...
literally throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what
Yes.
sticks.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hard to think of any other case in history that like I said, every clue you're just left of finding out who it is. But everything is not there, but it's
You
there.
have more
Right.
questions than answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we thought, okay, now that technology's come along, we're going to take a second look at the tie in like 2012. And we're going to look at it with an electron microscope. We're going to see what the hell's on there, and we're going to figure out where this tie came from. It might not tell us exactly who he is, but there's going to be some pollen that only comes from the Atlanta area that's on this tie, and we can narrow it down to that. So they take a look at the tie, and not only do they not find anything that could mark it to a specific region, they find even weirder shit on the tie.
God.
There is an insane amount of rare earth minerals and exotic metals and weird alloys of exotic metals on the tie that would never be used. So now
was an NHI.
So now we're like,
down.
it sort of eliminates these suspects that make sense, because you could have a guy like a Ted Braden or a Skip Hall, where they have this military experience and expertise and they could absolutely do it. But then it's like, well, why would he have a clip-on tie with exotic metals and rare earth minerals on it? And then who would be wearing this tie? And even still, we took another look at the tie recently and found that there are traces of uranium on the tie. So not only are there exotic forms of titanium in alloys that were never used, but there's also uranium on the tie.
That's so weird. This is
so now, like, did this come from a metallurgist? But then what metallurgist would possess a skill set to do this?
Yeah.
And
That's
if you're a
what- yeah, now you're
metallurgist, you're
thinking
probably making
research
pretty
lab.
good money.
Maybe he was
Yeah.
just so tired of being in the research lab that he's like, I need to live. So I'm going to research all these things and then plan the perfect heist just for it. And then goes back to being a metallurgically.
Yeah, but just like Tina Barr, it's this thing where, oh my God, we have evidence and it could lead us somewhere. And then we look at the evidence we have and it's like, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make
No.
any sense.
Right.
Just there scratching your head like, what? This
Yeah.
is not on my bingo card.
But we know too, just from, so many missing people in national forests and just, in the woods in general that have never been found despite, crazy searches done over many years and not a trace, is ever found, that again, it's still possible that he did make it. And there was,
Maybe
on the
he's a
flip
missing
side.
411.
There is a
Starting
small
to
chance
wonder.
that he doesn't pull his ripcord and then just, to quote Ralph Himmelsbach, augers into the ground. And I got a few problems with that. So Cooper spawns 6 copycats. One of those 6 copycats asked for instructions on how to use a parachute. One of the 6 copycats had done 1 practice jump in the military. But all 6 copycats make it to the ground and survive that jump, including Martin McNally. And Martin McNally, the pilots tried to kill him with speed, so he requests essentially the same flight configuration as Cooper, but the pilots are like, this motherfucker won't be able to tell the difference between 200 and 400 miles an hour at 10,000 feet, so we'll kill him with speed. So when Martin McNally jumps, the plane's doing like 350 miles an hour. And at that speed, the wind knocked him unconscious. And he wakes up in free fall, pulls the ripcord, and makes it to the ground alive.
That's hard.
Cooper's jump was much easier than that.
Yeah.
But to your point about the woods, I am a small, weak man. I am not a badass by any means. But I did live in that area. And I am confident you could drop me at night anywhere in that area almost any time of the year. And I can make it to a road or a creek or a stream or railroad tracks. It isn't so remote that you would be camping out. There is no
Gotcha.
if you watch Without a Paddle, DB Cooper burned his money to survive out in those treacherous wilderness. No, in the area Cooper jumped, you're minutes from a road, a railroad track, a stream, a creek, a trail. It's an area people lived in, worked in. There are small towns, there's logging roads, there's some industry out there. It's not the extreme wilderness. When they show like In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, they're showing you the area sort of around Mount St. Helens because that is remote wilderness. That's a rough place to be. But Cooper jumps about 30 miles south of all that, where there are towns and roads and society.
Now, what or how many people have come forward to say that they helped him, that they were his accomplice?
Accomplice confessions, not many directly. There are some people. So, like if I wrote a book and I said Lee was involved in this Albuquerque train robbery, and you weren't involved in it, but the story that I tell is kind of interesting. So when you go to get interviewed, maybe you're going to act a little bit coy about it. Like, yeah, I knew Darren. He might have robbed that train. I might have helped him, but yeah, I don't know. So there's some stuff like that, but nothing really direct, because that's debated often. Like, does he have an accomplice? Because it seems like a task you would want an accomplice for, but then also the fact that it doesn't seem to have come forward means multiple people being involved is unlikely.
Right.
I would imagine that'd be the person that would come forward more than the DB.
Right.
Yeah.
That guy's got a story to tell.
Planned, I helped him train, or I gave him all the manuals he needed, blah, blah, blah. But no, nothing really.
Was there a statute of limitations on any of those crimes?
Great question. Great question, Jen. So there was a 7-year statute of limitations on air piracy, which was at that time
sounds so badass.
at that time it was a life sentence and likely death penalty. And so at the end of that 7 years, we're coming up on, like, literally to the day, they're like, we have to do something about this. because the statute of limitations is up. So I'm not joking. Like the last day, the last minute, they got an indictment pushed through for John Doe for the November 24th, 1971 air piracy hijacking of Flight 305. So he's already been convicted of this crime. We just don't know his name.
Jesus.
Right.
And
He got away.
it's one of like 5 times that's been done in the United States.
Huh.
And the other examples aren't nearly as interesting because I looked him up a long time ago, but nothing that was like super famous or cool like this.
Wow.
I didn't even know you could indict John.
And then the statute of limitations. So if the 3 of you all helped him out in the hijacking, one drove him to the airport, one picked him up, and one laundered the money, all 3 of you are now clear. You're fully clear to talk about this because your statute of limitations has completely run out. The only person who could be guilty is Cooper at this point. But I've spoken to many lawyers about this, and the way it's been handled and just the amount of time that's gone by, Cooper's likely, at the very youngest, he's 90 years old today. More than likely, he's over 100. And people who smoked and drank and did daredevil shit in the 70s, they're not around.
No.
So he's dead.
Yeah.
But the way that's been handled, if he was still around, all the lawyers I've spoken to have said not only do they think he would get off, but they would be happy to represent him in this case because the FBI would want the confession. It's him. You know what? You've already been charged with it. We'll give you time served
They would
whatever.
Sentence him to like a Netflix special.
Yeah,
right.
Dude, you already won, so like there's nothing we can do for you now.
It's just such a crazy case. It really is. And out of all the cases and all the weird shit we cover, it's like the one thing that there's so much tangible evidence, and we're still all just like, I have no fucking clue.
No idea. And so many things even I've changed my mind on. So like when I went into this case, I would have told you I'm 99% sure his bomb was fake. There's no need for a real bomb. If I'm on an airplane and I tell you I have a bomb, you're not going to say, prove it. I don't believe you. Blow it up.
Right.
Let's see it. Go ahead.
You're just going to be like, oh shit, please don't blow up this
Right.
possible bomb.
But I've moved on that. And now I would say I'm 60% sure that it was real. I used to think that he's just spent that money and got away with it and bought cool shit and was reading books about himself on the beach laughing. But I had a numismatist on my show, Arthur Friedberg, who, if you're a collector of coins or currency, you're very well aware of the Friedberg family. And he basically was like, bro, he didn't spend that money. There's just no way. None of that money got spent. He told me that like it's statistically impossible in his mind that you're going to have over 9,000 $20 bills enter circulation, and not a single one of them was captured in a flagged transaction or by an astute steward or an astute teller.
And especially in the area when everyone is holding up the $20 bills, I'm sure, for years after.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to think.
You have to leave for sure.
With inflation, we're talking about 20s like it's no big deal. Like I'm going to go to the gas station and get a Coke and a candy bar and pay with a 20. In 1971, that value was essentially over $100. Mm-hmm. So you have to be thinking about it like $100 bills and not a 20 today.
Yeah.
How did they think because how much, I mean, what does that look like to have those stacks to amount to that much money and jumping out of a plane? How are you securing that to yourself?
Well, he dropped 6,000.
It's about the size of a school book bag, and it weighs 20 pounds.
That's it.
That's it? It just feels like, seems like it would be heavier.
Yeah. There was a thing once I saw online where they showed you like what $1 million looks like in a stack, and it's really unimpressive.
Yeah, at this last CooperCon, Ryan Burns, he's such a dork that he actually like cut out 10,000 pieces of paper and then put it all together in what would be the exact money bag, which is a fantastic recreation for me to look at. But I just like the idea that he's using one of those cutting boards to make 10,000 slices of paper.
Wow,
to
this is just
perfectly
2
recreate
afternoons
that.
worth of work for me.
I'm glad he did it, but
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
laugh, but like that's how invested people are in this case. They
Mhm.
are
Reminds me of Charlie
willing
Day and
to
his
do
little
things like that
spider
because
webs.
yeah, who
I mean, that's a special person to even I feel like if I did that and I was able to keep myself quiet and not tell a soul all this time, you're damn straight I'm gonna have a really good deathbed confession with
Oh,
yeah.
a
yeah.
few of those
A
20s
tell-all.
attached as evidence. You know? So that really seems to, if he
yeah, you would
survived,
want this
speak to his
story out
mindset.
there.
Yeah.
I understand not wanting to go to jail. I definitely
Yeah,
get
oh,
that.
absolutely. Yeah.
But don't you want to be like, I got away with it?
Yeah.
Not only did I do
Yeah.
this crazy, insane daredevil heist that was completely creative, I also got away with it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For so
mean-
long.
One last long shot. What are the odds that like someone put him up to it and they like I mean someone like the government or someone like that put him up to it?
Well, there are definitely theories that go that way. E. Howard Hunt, one of Nixon's plumbers of Watergate fame, also a DB Cooper suspect. He hilariously is wearing sunglasses in the Watergate hearing, just like DB Cooper wore sunglasses in the back of the plane. But if you want to, okay, put your tinfoil hat on
It's always on.
because
This is
Najib,
well,
you'll have to look this name up. Najib Halabi. He was meeting with Richard Nixon the morning of the hijacking to discuss airline safety to prevent hijackings.
So he planned the hijacking and be like, see, we were just
And
talking about that this morning.
when I
like
first
contracts out.
learned of Najib Halabi, I punch in my Google, oh, Najib Halabi, and then I click on his Wikipedia page, and I swear to God, the first thing I said was, God damn, he looks exactly like the sketch. Because he does. Because of course he does.
Of course.
I'm 1,000,000% sure he's not DB Cooper. Because he was in Washington, D.C. at like noon on November 24th. However, a dead ringer for the sketch.
So what would be the reason behind the government theory? What would have been the motive?
Because there were a lot of hijackings going on at the time. There's a really great book about the hijackings going on at the time. It's Golden Age of Skyjacking, something like that. Brendan Kerner. Sorry, I can't remember the. God damn, I can't remember the name of that title, but it's by Brendan Kerner about the Golden Age of Skyjacking, and it was all like these politically motivated, taking me to Cuba. I don't want to be in the U.S. anymore, and there's a debate going on between the government, airlines, and airports, which are 3 different entities. They all said, we need to do something about security and passenger screening. All 3 of them were saying it, and all 3 of them were saying you should do it. So the airlines were saying the airport should do it. The airport was saying the government should do it. The government was saying airlines should take care of it. And they all knew it needed to happen, but nobody wanted to do it.
Right.
And then we had the DB Cooper and his copycats, which got a little bit more violent than Cooper did. But the only real security change that was made because of Cooper was they created this device called the Cooper vane. And what that did, it was a lever that attached to the aft stairs release. So when the plane was traveling faster than like 50 knots, which would essentially be immediately after takeoff, the wind will push this flap that will prevent that aft staircase from being lowered while in flight.
Huh.
And that's the Cooper vane to prevent that from being opened to allow people to jump out. That was his change. We got metal detectors mandatory a few years after that, but that was sort of already in the works. You can't really point to Cooper as this is the one that changed security. Yeah. No, there was a gigantic debate. Also, the idea that the government would need to stage a hijacking to change security. No, you don't need to do that. There's tons of them going on already. That's a ridiculous idea. It would be like Walgreens saying, you know what? We're going to stage a theft of razors. And then people will know. They don't need to stage that. Someone is going to go steal razors.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just
keeps going.
Yeah, there's obviously no answer, but it's just so crazy. It's been this long and we're no closer, not even a little bit, than the day he jumped out of that plane.
Maybe
I don't
we'll
know.
just
I
never
hate
know.
looking at it that way. I mean, maybe that is true, but like, I've sucked so much time into this, and I've thought about it constantly. I've lost sleep over this. I've spent so much of my own money on this. I've chased ridiculous leads. I've done stupid tasks, thinking that it will go somewhere. And the idea that I'm looking at this and I'm no farther than I was 10 years ago when I first read about this, or when I first got serious about it, is just so discouraging. I mean, maybe that's true, maybe it's not.
But you're not going to stop.
I understand.
I think it's more like we have these weird pieces of evidence, and we're not looking at the right places to fit them in the puzzle yet. And maybe one day we're going to get this great suspect, and it's like, oh my God, this guy would have weird rare earth minerals and metals on his clip-on tie.
Right? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, okay, well, that fits.
It's going to be someone that sells a house one day, and like they demo it and they find a safe
They find all the money.
exact
Yeah.
stacks of
It's just
money.
the backpack inside the fucking wall or something.
Here's what I'm most upset about at this point in time is I think that there's a really good chance this case gets solved by we figure out, that it was Cody Maloney, and he was awesome, but he died in 1995. And he's definitely DB Cooper. Here's this DNA match. Here's all these things that fit. It was him. Now I know who DB Cooper was. Cool. But I don't get to know the story of what happened when his boots hit the ground that night.
Yeah.
I want to know that more than anything else.
That would eat me
I
up
want to
so
know,
bad.
did it go according to plan? When you hit the ground, what did you do? What was your thought? Where did you go? What were you thinking? 2 weeks after the hijacking, they're not on your tail directly. How paranoid are you? Are you watching this in the news? Are you reading the same books that I've read on the case? I want to know all that stuff so badly. And it just seems like those are the answers I'm never going to get.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are all great questions. I have all the same questions, but I obviously have not spent
Right.
the amount of time or resources that you have in it.
See,
I'm
that's
going to
what
lay in bed awake tonight thinking about that stuff.
I sympathize with you. I have my areas of things that are unsolved that I obsess over, but
Yeah, don't get him on drones.
yeah, no, we're not talking about the drones. That's a whole. Josh, you had to say it. It is a whole other level of shit going on right now.
started on
No, Darren, we really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
Again, I appreciate you being flexible.
Yeah, thank you.
And
Yeah, we may have to have another part to this because
part
there's
two,
a
I was thinking the
lot
same
more.
thing.
I want to get into the
that-
suspects.
Oh,
Like, yeah,
yeah,
Yes.
that I wanted to get into too. So I
Mhm.
think
I wanna start playing
if you're
Guess Who.
willing, I think
Yeah,
we'll
I'd be
have
happy to come
another-
back anytime.
Yeah, awesome.
DB Cooper
Yeah,
Part 2. The Cooper
I am
Era.
very interested, like you said, though. Like, what was that like? When, like, if it went as planned, what'd you do when you hit the ground? Did you call anybody? Like,
Yeah,
did
did
you
you
leave
get
the
somebody to pick you
country?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's such a crazy story.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And if people are listening right now, I'm sure everyone's gonna sit up tonight, like, I gonna figure this out. Everyone's
Well-
Googling.
Every time you think you realize there's 10 reasons that can't
Mhm.
be true. I'll think, oh well,
Mhm.
what about But then I'm like, no.
No.
I always tell people, because it's like, why are you obsessed with this? And I always tell people, it's like, this is like the most interesting book I've ever read. But before I got it, somebody ripped out the first few chapters and the last few chapters. So I
Mhm.
only got to read this middle part of this book that's amazing. And I don't know the beginning and I don't know the end.
hmm
Yeah. Oh. I mean, I really do hope we find it out even for your sake, Darren. Like, I just hope someone finds out. But yeah, it is.
There's a lot of people working on it.
Yeah, nonstop. And I can imagine, like, if I lived near the area where he supposedly jumped, I would still be looking today. I'm sure it'd be like a weekend. Every other weekend, I'd be like, let's go on a hike.
Again, Lee.
Just, I don't have anything necessary to look for, and I go magnet fishing and have metal detectors, and I'm not even looking for anything in particular. Oh, all right, Darren, where could people find you?
The Cooper Vortex podcast, wherever you get your podcast from, check it out. Super awesome, in my unbiased opinion.
Yes, it is great, and
No, it really
you'll
is
just have
good.
more questions. I can't tell you there's any answers, but you'll have many more questions.
Yes,
absolutely.
It's great. Again, thank you very much for coming on. We appreciate it, Darren.
All right, thanks, guys. It's my pleasure.
All right, we'll talk to you later.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to join us as a guest, suggest a topic, or have a story you want us to share, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at ssospodcast@gmail.com. For more behind-the-scenes updates and exclusive insights about SSOS, make sure to follow us on social media. And don't miss out on the fun. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, thank you for listening to the Secret Society of Strangers podcast. This show is an independent production, researched and crafted by our passionate team. But we couldn't do it without all of you. We truly appreciate your support. Embrace the unknown, for not all secrets are meant to be kept. Farewell, strangers.